Welcome to jamplay.com. My name is Stuart Ziff and welcome to Tools and Techniques. I believe this is week 6. I hope you're all staying safe and you're well wherever you are, wherever part of the country you're in. I'm in LA and it's a warm day here. So if you hear some noise in here, it's the fan blowing on me. Anyway, nice to be with you again today. Been having a lot of fun with this course every week, talking about the basics of what you need to know to be a good soloist, to be a good blues player, and everything that I've talked about since week 1 is perfectly applicable to any style of music. And as you just heard me playing a little bit of kind of quasi chord melody, I was trying to move some chord voicings around in an interesting manner that would catch your ear to where you would hear the root, the 5th on the bottom, the root, catch that flat 3rd, there's the major 3rd, things like that, because that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to expand on what we did last week. Last week we talked about arpeggios and blending them with scales, and this week we're going to expand on that a little bit more. So with what I was doing when we went live here was just trying to show you that by moving those bass notes around and getting those, hearing those intervals, you get some really interesting things to play. And not only does it work for playing chords and chord melody, which we do when we play jazz, but obviously it's going to work when you're playing a solo, when you're improvising. And the more common way to do it would be to not play the major 3rd, but to play it like that. That's the minor 3rd. That time I played the major 3rd. So it's little things like that that can make all the difference in the world in what you're playing. And it's also going to make all the difference in the world as to what you play next when you're learning how to improvise. But that aside, we just thought we would do a little review of what we've done. Week 1, if you haven't seen the video, is strictly about rhythm guitar parts and how they work, and they're the most basic parts that you need to know for playing blues, but they're very important parts, because if you have to be able to play them in time and play in the groove. And even if if all you're doing is playing along with backing tracks, you don't want to be playing ahead of the backing track. You don't want to have bad timing. The better your time, the more fun you're going to have playing the rhythm, and the more fun you have playing the rhythm, the better your soloing is going to sound. Because if you're playing way deep in the groove and you're just playing that rhythm, if you're playing that rhythm and backing up another soloist, if you've got a backing track and maybe there's a piano soloing for 36 measures and you're going for 36 bars, that's a long time to hold down that groove. Well, let me tell you, when it comes your turn to solo, you've got a better and a deeper understanding of what it means to play a solo now, because you've been working that rhythm so hard that you're ready. A lot of times a lot of players think, oh, I'm ready to bust out and just burn a solo. And what happens is, yeah, you burn a solo, but it's more in the groove. It swings more. It probably has more rhythmic value to it than what you may have previously done the day before or 2 days before or a week earlier because you've been working that rhythm. So now what you play is maybe you decide to anticipate a beat. You're playing a measure, say you're playing a phrase that sounds like this, you know, say you go like, well, when I grabbed that, I was clearly anticipating that beat, so that played over into the next measure. So those are some of the things that tend to happen to your playing, and that's all the good stuff. You know, it's all good stuff when you have your rhythm chops down. I remember that first week, somebody sent a question in, and I'm here to take your questions, so please feel free to ask away. You know, somebody asked, well, how do you keep it interesting when you're playing something so simple? Well, my answer to that is it's a very selfless approach, because at that point what you're doing is you're backing somebody else up. And even if there isn't anybody else in the room but you're playing with a backing track, you're still playing rhythm guitar. So to practice that rhythm and to get it down really solid and right in the pocket really means something, because when you come around to play a solo, your solo is going to have more depth, it's going to have more rhythmic value to it than it normally would. After that next week we started to work on chord voicings, important chord voicings that you need to know for playing blues, your dominant seventh chords, your ninth chords. Things like that. We got into turnarounds. Things like that. We had a week where we looked at arpeggios and why it's important. I was explaining why it's important to know your arpeggios, and I'll say it once more. If you don't know your arpeggios, you're not addressing the chord. And ultimately, what I hear from a lot of players, a lot of students, my online students, my students at Musicians Institute, somebody will say, oh, I've been working, you know, I know all my pentatonic patterns and I'm just bored, I've hit a wall. And my first question to them is, well, do you know your arpeggios? And about 99.9% of the time what I hear is, no, I don't know my arpeggios. And as soon as I say, okay, we'll play this, and then they all of a sudden realize that they're missing something in their playing. So that's how important arpeggios are. And then last week we got into the idea of arpeggios and scales. How do they link up? What do they have to do with each other? How do we make sense of, how do we make sense of it all? And what am I supposed to think of, scales or arpeggios? Well, my answer to that is ultimately what you're thinking about is learning a language. And the language that we're talking about here today and what we've been talking about, obviously, is the language of the blues. And the language of the blues is made up of several things. It's made up of arpeggios. In the realm of things, if we're just looking at a traditional 12-bar blues with 3 chords, we're talking about 3 dominant chords. Not minor chords, but dominant chords, like an A7. A blues in A would be A7, D7, and E7, or A7, D9, and E9. These are dominant chords. We think of playing, and they are major chords. They're not minor. So if you're playing a minor pentatonic scale, it doesn't mean you're playing a blues in minor. And some people make that mistake of saying that in their language. So I'm here to rap you on the knuckles with the neck of my guitar to tell you that that's the wrong way to think, that's the wrong way to speak, because it's not true. So what I'm trying to get you to do is to think about playing to the sound of dominance, as I like to call it, which is the sound of an A7 chord or an A9 chord. There's your chord. Now, the A minor pentatonic scale is a minor pentatonic scale because it has a minor third in it. It has the flat third in it. That's what it has. That's what gives it that minor sound. If you move that minor third up a half step, you're now into the territory of the arpeggio, which means you're addressing the chord. If you go, okay? So everything that I played there was addressing the sound of an A7 chord. And if you're listening to B.B. King, or you've listened to Albert King, or you're listening to Freddie King, you're listening to T-Bone Walker, you're listening to Otis Rush, maybe you're listening to Michael Bloomfield, maybe you're listening to Duane Allman and the Allman Brothers. Maybe you're listening to Hubert Sumlin, Howlin' Wolf's guitar player. You're going to hear, these are the things that you're going to hear. And that's what we're going to talk about today, along with another concept that basically comes from jazz, but is perfectly applicable to the idea of playing blues. And that idea is playing what's known as a slur. And you know, if you've been here every week and you've listened to me play, you know when I play, I don't hit every single note. I don't mean that you don't hear the note. What I mean is I don't literally pluck every note. I'm like, that was a slur. That was another slur. That was a triplet with basically pull-offs. Okay, you might have heard. I'm sure you've heard that riff. So we're going to talk a little bit about slurs. Now, what is a slur? A slur is a slide. In other words, you're sliding to a note. You may hit the first note, then you slide it down a half step. And that one little movement, I've found, as I've turned other guitar players, students on to that idea, is something that automatically changes the vibe of what you're playing. Because instead of going, you're going. You're slipping and sliding and going in and out of the groove at that point. And it's a lot funkier and it's a greasier kind of sound, and that's what we're going for. If you heard that expression applied to being a good player, it's like, yeah, he's got some grease. You know what I mean? It's moving, it's in the groove. Well, if you hear a shuffle, now that time I did a big slur. I slid down from the E on the third string at the 9th fret. This isn't in the tab, by the way. To D on the G string, all the way down, and then pulled it off to C. So I went E, D, C. I played the 5th, the 4th, and the minor third. So now if you're just thinking in the minor pentatonic, by doing that, it gets you away from thinking about the scale, because you're not really thinking about the scale. You're thinking about the kind of personality and the kind of feel that you're trying to put into those notes, which is what you want. You want it to feel good. You want it to sound good. You don't want to make it sound as though you are absolutely playing a scale. So that's why That's why I do these things. So let's take a look at the tab here, and in example number 1, let's put the tab up. I've got it right here on my iPad. And you're going to see this riff that's going from A7 to E7. In other words, you could play this at the end of a blues, a 12-bar form. You could play this basically at measure number, somewhere at the end of measure number 11, because it's resolving to the 5 chord, which is E7. And if you notice, it's coming in on the and of 2. So you rest, it's 1, 2, 1, 2. And it's very simple. You're just going to slur that E flat at the 7th fret, excuse me, at the 8th fret. You're going to slur that down to D on the 7th fret. Now you're going to grab C at the 5th fret, 3rd string, and you're going to give it a little push and bend it up a little bit. Now you're going to do this little triplet, little curl thing, triplet at the 7th, 6th, and 5th fret on the 4th string. Now we get into the resolution part of the riff, which clearly has a pentatonic sound to it. That's the whole lick. So that's a good riff to know if you're coming out of your solo, you're coming at the end of the, you might be at the end of the first 12 bars and you're playing and you know. That was a variation on it, but basically I hit all of those notes. I hit all of those notes. Now you see what it does? It sets the stage for what's to come, because you're going. So you might go. You might go from E to D, which is the 4th, and if you bend that up, you're in your next pattern. See how these things connect? And what am I doing? I'm playing across the neck, but the tonality is still moving up. I'm going from see what I mean? Going across the neck, the tonality is moving up. So what might I play after that? Now the reason why I played that again was because it's almost like a motif, and a motif is a phrase that we use to basically set the tone for what it is that we're going to play, and we often refer back to that motif in solo, and you're going to hear that a lot in jazz. Jazz players do it, but great blues players do it. B.B. King did it all the time. Most notably, Duane Allman was famous for doing it because he learned it from listening to John Coltrane. Mike Bloomfield used to do it all the time because he listened to B.B. King and he listened to a lot of jazz. So it's a concept that comes from jazz that's perfectly applicable to playing blues, because blues is part of the language of jazz. So what you're doing is you're taking these concepts of phrasing and improvisation, which is exactly what B.B. King did. It's exactly what T-Bone Walker did. Freddie King to a lesser, slightly lesser degree, but he did do it. Albert King to a slightly lesser degree. Most definitely Eric Clapton, and most definitely Duane Allman and Mike Bloomfield. So all of these guys, and Otis Rush used to do, there are many examples of Otis Rush playing within a motif. So there are endless examples of this, where this little, that little thing might come back. I don't want to say come back to haunt you, but it comes back a little bit later in your solo, you know. Now that time I went, and I basically played it up an octave. That little triplet riff in the first measure from, I played, okay, so right then and there, I'm referring back to what I played earlier because it's an integral part of the solo. And like I said, if you're listening to people like B.B. King, if you're listening to T-Bone, you're listening to all these great players, you're hearing them do the same things. You're hearing them refer back to things that they played maybe a measure earlier or 2 measures earlier. So that's what we're talking about here. So the difference between major and minor thirds here, like I said, let's take a look at the second staff on the tab. You know, you see that it says major and minor thirds. Well, we're in the key of A. Well, that's C right there. That's your minor third. That's C. There's the major third. Where's the major third? Major third is up a half step. It's C sharp. And if you've been here every week, you've heard me play those kind of phrases all the time. I'm doing them on purpose to show you so you get used to hearing the way they sound and how they sit and seeing how they sit on the guitar in various places. And I'm trying to keep it uniform, just playing it basically in the 5th position. But let's take a look at this first riff, which is notes. D, E, A. Then we bend. Well, actually, no. It starts. Sorry, my fault. Starts on the. Oh no, it does start there. So what I'm doing is I'm coming down at the end of the phrase on C and then resolving it to the root, which is A. But what B.B. King does that I caught is the very next phrase where it says play like this, and it's like that. There's your major third. So coming down chromatically. Like that. So you're going. Now, G, G, E, E flat, D. Now, what you've got is you've got a resolution there, which is exactly what that is. You're resolving to that major third. So I'm going to do that when I solo, so you want to get that one down. Let's talk a little bit about an idea that we talk about in jazz that I've showed some people, many students, and that's the idea of chromatic approach. Well, chromatic approach and doing slurs kind of go hand in hand, because if you noticed, going back to that very first phrase that I was talking about, that's a chromatic slur. I'm going from E flat to D. Okay? Well, sometimes we literally play those things. chromatic approach in what I just played. I went. I'll do it again. Okay? A lot of chromaticism and a lot of chromatic approach. Well, one of the things, there are many ways to chromatically approach the note that you want to play. Sometimes we play from a half step above the note. Sometimes we play from a half step below the note and then approach the note, which you heard me do. So that's chromatic approach. So where you just go a half step, you know, if you're meaning to play A, try starting on A flat. Don't make too big of a deal out of it, because in blues that A flat is a major 7 and it's more or less a no-no. We don't really play it. But if you use it as a quick passing tone, that's fine. And anybody will tell you, and any good experienced player is going to tell you that. If you use a major 7th as a passing tone, you know, you heard me go. See what I mean? So you heard it going by, and it's going in and out of the phrase so quickly that you don't really hear it, you don't really notice it. It's not a big deal. So you don't really want to make a big deal out of that note. Very important. So like I said, there's two ways to chromatically approach a note. One way would be from below, a half step below, or a half step above. Now this next phrase you're going to see here, okay, I'm going to bend that C, come back to C. Now I'm going to approach A from the 6th fret to the 5th fret. There's that first string, there's that bend with my first finger again. I'm throwing that out there, because if you can start to get in the habit of doing that, it's going to free up your playing in a huge way. I know for all of us, to start bending notes with your first finger can be challenging. I know it was for me, and it was for everybody that I know. But it doesn't take much, because we're not talking about bending a whole step. We're talking about just giving a push. So I'm bending that minor third up to the major third. And B.B. King, if you've watched any kind of videos of B.B. King playing, you see Freddie King, he tends to do that every once in a while. A lot of players do it. It's a very useful tool when you're playing. So that's chromatic approach, and how to use it in terms of, you know, the minor third, the major third. We've got another riff here. Let's take a look at that one riff. The second system from the bottom, where I was just talking about chromatic approach. We've got a riff there. There's some chromatic approach from the flat 5, from the flat 5 to the 4, and then that's a nice little phrase. If you play it correctly, you're going to see that it can lead you around to a lot of different, if you hit it right, it's going to lead you around to places you may not have thought about if you're trying to improvise. And if you're learning somebody's solo and you hear a phrase that's similar to that, you're going to see that it goes to the next logical place. it's either going to move up the neck like that, but in all likelihood, good blues players keep their melody going forward, like I did when I played. Things like that. So let's go down to the very last riff. Oh no, let's look at, we kind of did that. Let's look at playing the pentatonic and ending on the flat 7. And this is the flat 7 of A would be G. That's your 7th. So we've got a little riff here. Now I went, there's your major third right there. I'm hitting C sharp on the 2nd string at the 14th fret. And that note is G. There's the flat 7 right there. So you're walking it. Now that's walking down from E to E flat to D flat, all on the 4th string, 14th, 13th, 12th, and 11th fret. It's all chromatic. Then we're going to cross back over to the low A string and play A at the 12th fret and grab G right there. But to play it here, gives it a different kind of sound, it gives it a different character. And it's just nice to play up there and not play the usual, you know, if you listen to the people that I've mentioned, you're not going to hear them playing the usual stuff up there. You know, there's always one little thing that they do, the one little turn in what they play that gives it that personality, that's what makes it stand up. That's the thing that caught your attention. That's the thing that lights up your ears when you're listening to it. It's that one note. And more often than not, it's either the major third or the minor third, or it might be the flat 7. It could be any number of things, but it's a note, and you didn't expect to hear it like that. Like, so those are the things that we've been talking about, obviously, and I'm going to do a little playing with the track, and I'm going to play all of these examples, or most of them, a couple of times so you can hear them. I see we have a question here. A slur is a slide, Big Jim. A slur is a slide. You're sliding the note. You're just not playing the note. You play the first note, and you let the velocity of that note carry it down to the next note. Maybe you slur the first note, now you play that note. That's the difference. There's no real difference between a slur and a slide. Instead of calling sliding it, we call it a slur, because that's exactly what you're doing. You're slurring into the next note. So I'm going to play all these. I'm going to play basically these examples. If I embellish them or play them a note or two different, you know, don't hang me out to dry over it. You know, I'm just playing. These are riffs that I've, you know, kind of came up with, and things that I've learned from listening to my heroes and putting them together in the way I play. And I will play them at first time around. I will play them kind of slow and obvious for you, so you can hear them. And then probably on the next course, I'm going to play them the way I normally would play a phrase like that. So if they go by a little quicker, what you want to do is you want to keep your ear tuned for when you think you hear that minor seventh or the major seventh, or you hear me slurring into a note. You hear chromaticism. You hear things that sound chromatic. That's what you want to be listening for. You don't want, don't be looking at, don't be watching my hand so much as listening, because that is so important to the art of playing. So you got to listen. If you listen and you hear it, you're going to be surprised what you're going to be capable of doing. So I'm going to put this track on right now, and hopefully I won't make a fool out of myself. So here we go. Chromatic Approach. So there you go. There's a whole lot of major thirds, minor thirds. I pretty much played all those phrases that we went over here. I played the slurs, I played the major thirds, I played the minor thirds. I did the chromatic approach. The idea is to hear it. When you start to play, and if you decide to do something a little bit different and start your solo off with a slur, maybe like that, sets the tone. That's a totally different attitude than something that you may have played a week ago. See, we got a question here. Do I have any mechanical tricks for bending with the first finger? No. It's really being able to, making sure, a lot of times we have a lot of muscles to develop in our hands, okay, to get our hands to do all the things that we want them to do. And when it comes to string bending, you know, the more you practice bending intervals that are out of your comfort zone, like bending, you know, if bending a whole step is out of your comfort zone, then you need to work on that. If you don't know how to bend a step and a half like this, you know, how can I do that? I do that because I practiced really hard getting those step and a half, you know, a step and a half bend down under my fingers, so that by the time you can bend that far and you can push that string, and I'm playing with 11s. So I play with 11s. I've got really very strong hands. So in essence, you know, this part of my hand that's doing all the work is I've already had a lot of strength built up. So to learn how to bend with my first finger, to be able to go. In other words, you want to push with this part of your hand, this part of your finger, right in here, this little groove, right in here, because that's it. And maybe try going, and then do that little triplet pull-off run, chromatic thing. That's what you're playing. Those are the tones you're playing, but you're going to play it, which is a slightly different sound. So learning how to bend with your first finger, the best thing I can tell you is it just takes practice. You just have to do it. And you don't have to. You have to, and you also have to remember, you're not talking about bending up a whole step. You're only talking about bending the note a half step. And if it makes it to like about 85-90% of the distance, that's totally okay, because that bend is a little bit in the cracks, as we say. So I wouldn't obsess over making sure that the pitch is absolutely, you know, dead on. You know, I would say, you know, there's a little, it's a little on the blue side, but that's okay. That's perfectly all right. I see we got a couple of questions here. Is the Mixolydian mode the same as adding the major third to the minor pentatonic? No. I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. In the Mixolydian mode, we have a flat 7. We have a minor 7th. But the difference with the minor third, you know, and I don't want to get into the modal thing right here, because there's a reason why we talk about knowing modes and why you need to know modes and why it doesn't matter if you haven't been playing all that long, because it's not going to help. It's really not going to help you right now. Because I'm just going to say this and then we're going to move on to the next question. I know we've got another question here. Oh no, thought we did. We learn the modes so we can analyze a piece of music and affix a chord scale, in other words a modal scale, be it a Mixolydian scale or an Ionian scale, to what that melody note is in reference to that chord. We see that in jazz. That's how we teach jazz. That's how we learn jazz. That's how we learn how to analyze a jazz standard so we can solo over it. And we just use the mode. We would say, oh yeah, that chord and that melody is in the Dorian mode. So you might refer to it when you're soloing. But in terms of playing blues and thinking about the Mixolydian mode, I don't do that. That's like a fusion thing. That's you know, you're into like Robin Ford territory and Scott Henderson, which is great stuff, but it's not traditional blues playing. And to start to think like that, if you're not totally adept at playing if you haven't worn it out playing all your minor and major pentatonic patterns, and you haven't worn out the arpeggios, you have absolutely no business wading in the waters of the modes. Not yet. And any experienced teacher is going to tell you, you have to know this stuff first before you go on to playing modes. So I don't know how long, if you've been playing a long time and you're ready to do modes, that's great. But if you're not, if you haven't really exhausted all your possibilities with the pentatonics and the arpeggios, then you're not ready to start to look at this in a modal sense. And I never look at traditional blues in a modal sense. So I hope that didn't offend you there. But no, we don't think of the Mixolydian, the minor. We don't think of the flat 7 in the Mixolydian and the third business with the minor pentatonic. No, we don't look at it like that. Do I ever bend towards the floor? Yes, I have. I just bent that G string on D. And you get the same kind of effect doing that as you do bending with your first finger. Who's that sound like? That's Jimi Hendrix. That's what Jimmy used to do. So bending down the floor is very cool. I picked that up from John McLaughlin. Back, I think it was in '89 or '90, he was interviewed in Guitar Player magazines when he was starting to get into this scallop neck thing, and he was, playing that music that was very Indian based in India kind of vibe stuff. And I just found out my iPad is falling away here. And he talked about how he got turned on to bending notes down, pulling the string down. Now you can't do that with your high E string, and you can't get a lot of mileage. You can do a little bit with your B string. The G string and the D string and the E, the A, your bottom 5 more or less can do it, but that's definitely a cool thing to do. Definitely, I've done it. I don't think about it all the time. I've kind of got to be really warmed up and kind of on that kind of trajectory when I'm playing a solo. But yeah, I've done it, and bending that note is cool. So let's talk about how to practice this stuff. And let me get rid of some of this delay here. Let's make sure that you go, I would say for now your best thing to do is to go over your arpeggio positions, your patterns, and try and identify the intervals. And if you're identifying the intervals, then you're going to see the major third. There's the root, there's the third, there's the fifth, there's the seventh, there's the root, there's the third, fifth, seventh, root. Now you go up to the next position, starting on the third, fifth, seventh, root, third, fifth, seventh, root, third. Move up to your next position. Fifth, seventh, root, third, fifth, seventh, root, third, fifth. Go to your last pattern position, beginning on the seventh. 7, root, third, fifth, seventh, root, third, fifth, seventh. Okay, so now you're identifying your intervals, and you're really picking up where that major third is. So if you know where the major third is, you know that the minor third can't be far behind because it's only a half step down. You've heard that in rock playing, you've heard that everywhere. So you want to make sure that you go over your arpeggio patterns as best as you can and do your best to identify those intervals. Because the more you know them and the more you recognize them, you know exactly where they are, you can't miss. You're going to hit them eventually. You're going to start to do that in and out thing in your playing where you're going into the minor third, or maybe you're coming out of the major third and you're resolving it down to the minor third, or vice versa. You're going to start to do it. But you have to recognize them, you've got to see them, you got to be able to name them. And when you can do that, you really are knowing the fretboard. You're knowing the fretboard more. The more you know the fretboard, the more fun you're going to have playing, because you're going to see the possibilities become endless. I see we have another question here. Would it be easier to learn blues and acoustic or electric? That's kind of a trick question. Obviously, if you're going to learn Delta blues, electric guitar doesn't have a whole lot to do with playing electric blues. Excuse me, electric guitar doesn't have a whole lot to do with playing Delta blues, acoustic blues. Now, Muddy Waters did transfer a lot of the things that he did play on acoustic guitar to the electric guitar, and things that he learned from Robert Johnson, or we've all learned from Robert Johnson, have all been applied to the electric guitar. But if you're going to learn acoustic blues, you want to learn it on an acoustic guitar. To play it on an electric guitar is not the same. You're certainly not going to get the same kind of sound. You're not going to get the same kind of vibe. It all depends what you want, what you're looking to play. If you're looking to learn how to play electric blues, you certainly want to learn how to play it on an electric guitar, because there's a lot more to do with string bending, as I've just shown you, slurring and things like that you don't necessarily hear on acoustic guitar all that much. So if you're going to do electric blues, you would want to be seen holding an electric guitar, and if you're playing acoustic blues, you would want to be seen holding an acoustic guitar. So where was I? So chromatic approach. Try playing this kind of pentatonic riff instead of going. Now that's clearly a pentatonic riff. Only this time, approach the first note, which the first note of the riff is actually A, but we're going to approach it from A flat. Now you could go and approach the root again on the fourth string, like that, and then try coming down and walk chromatically down to that third, which is C sharp. You're going to certainly hear that a lot, because a lot of students, a lot of people here at Jam Play have asked me, when do I bring chromatics into my soloing? Well, you got to know what you're doing with using chromatics. I'll throw one at you for a second. When you play the if you played an A chromatic scale against an A7 chord, which would be, well, every single note that I just played works over an A7. Except that note, A flat, the major 7, which I said earlier is kind of a no-no, only unless you use it as a passing chord. So, in terms of playing things chromatically, I wanted to interject that, but that's something you might want to think about in the future, and I'm probably going to talk about that in a couple of weeks. But you want to think about approaching some of your notes chromatically, maybe with a slur. And don't forget to use those slurs. And practice starting off, you may want to practice starting off your 12-bar solo with a slurred note. And that was all on the first string except for the last note. No, excuse me, the last note was on the first string. Now you're getting a personality in your playing. Now you're bringing all the things to bear that all the greats did, including, as I mentioned earlier, Jimi Hendrix, when we were talking about bending that string down across the fret in a downward trajectory. So that's where we're coming from with all this stuff, okay? So I thank you all for coming by today. I hope you enjoyed the lesson. It's going to be up here, the video rebroadcast. Check it out if you want. We've got a track here to play along to in the key of A at a moderate tempo. So you can certainly play all of these riffs that are written down in the tab, and I'd refer to them. And if you know, like I said, your goal is to identify those intervals, be able to know where that major third is, where the minor third is. You're slurring in and out of notes. You're starting to do some bending, a little bit, just a bend with a half step with your first finger, say from the minor third up to the major third, and then resolve that. And you're going to see that these little tools and these little tools that improve your technique will certainly improve your blues playing. They're going to improve your guitar playing no matter what kind of music you play. You're going to have a lot more fun. You're going to play some more interesting things, and you're going to amaze your friends. And when you sit down and play with your friends, when all of this craziness with the coronavirus is over with and we start playing together again, you know, your friends are going to see, wow, man, you weren't playing that before, and you're going to start to take on a whole new personality when you play. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. I can promise you that. So thanks for coming by today. I'll be back next Wednesday, same time, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. on the West Coast. And I'm here at Jam Play at my Q&A on Mondays and Thursdays and Saturdays. Mondays at 3 p.m. West Coast time, Thursday nights 7 p.m. West Coast time, and Saturday afternoons 3 p.m. West Coast time. So come on by, bring some questions. I'll be more than glad to answer them, and anything I can do to help. I'm just here to help folks. So come on back next week, practice up, straight ahead. Have a good one.